Welcome to the Hope After Narcissistic Abuse podcast. I am your host, Aimie Helms. Each week, you will hear from experts across the country and even world speak to you on recovering from narcissistic abuse and even how to manage these relationships. You will also hear some periodic solo episodes on how to manage these relationships and what recovery is like. It is my hope that you will leave each episode with some renewed hope that you can and will beat this. Thank you for tuning in. Welcome to another episode of Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Today we have Dr. Aimie Apigian. I'm very excited to have her with us. She is a leading medical expert on how life experiences get stored in the body and how restoring the body to the best state of health throughout her signature model and methodology. And she is doubly certified medical physician in both preventive medicine and addiction medicine. She's a master's in biochemistry and master's in public health. She's also certified functional medicine physician and has training in neuro-autoimmunity, nutrition, and genetics, as well as somatic experiencing, NeuroAffective Touch. I think as we are going on today, she could probably explain a lot of what that is and how she incorporates that into her work. So welcome, Dr. Aimie.
Thank you so much. I'm really happy to be here.
So first, what got you into doing this work?
Wow. So when I look back, I see one event, I guess you'd call it an event that really changed the course of my life. And that was me adopting my son, Miguel. And this was while I was in medical school at Loma Linda University in California. And I had just finished up my master's in biochemistry, had a few months before I jumped back into third year of medicine, and had always felt the calling to help kids who were hurting. I think that this comes a lot from probably my experience with my father, and he was adopted. And so I decided to become a foster parent. And just about the time that I was back into third year of medical school, they call me, right? And you never forget the call that comes. You never forget that call. And it was the call of, hey, we have this 4-year-old boy. This is his history. This is what's happening. Will you take him? And it was an easy yes for me. It was not an easy journey once he arrived, but it was an easy yes. And for that experience to have come into my life at that time when I thought that I knew everything that a hurting kid would need, and I realized that I actually knew nothing about how the body actually works and how the body goes through trauma, how it stores trauma, and then just gets stuck in that trauma. And so I had a lot to learn, and that's what started my journey. But my goodness, there's been so many things since then. But looking back, Aimie, that would be what really changed the course of what I thought would be a very traditional medical career.
I'm just sitting here thinking, third year med student taking on a foster child. As my brother and his wife are physicians, and so I kind of walked that life knowing their stress and thinking, wow, what a blessing for you to take that on as a third year med student. Wow.
Yes, that's exactly what I say looking back. Just wow. Just wow.
I don't use many other words. It's like, oh, wow.
Yeah.
So, and then you went on to get more and more training after that while you had a foster child.
Well, I mean, it was me needing to find answers.
Yeah. So that's what it was. It's looking for answers.
Looking for answers. And when I was doing everything that I knew and could at the time. And here I am on this medical campus, and I have some of the best child therapists, child psychiatrists, as my resources, and realizing and seeing firsthand that when I take him to these places, when they do these approaches, when they do these therapies, he's coming back home worse. It's almost like I don't even want to take him to those places anymore because he comes back even worse. And I don't think, Aimie, that I would have believed it if I hadn't lived it. I would have probably been one of those that, just like all of my colleagues, right? Like we have this intellectual skepticism where we're like, oh, well, we know better than you, and you must just be a bad parent. And that's why you can't, kind of manage your child and the emotions that they have. And that's why you're experiencing worse behavior after different therapies. But because I was living it and I knew everything that I was doing, and that there was nothing else that I was not doing, that I was giving him my all and my best, and it clearly was not helping.
Right.
Then that's what threw me into, well, what am I going to do? Right? Am I going to just live like this? That was not an option. He was getting bigger. He was getting even just the self-harm, the harm to others, the property damage. I knew that something needed to change, and that I, now being his adoptive mom, because by then I had adopted him, that I was the agent for change in his life, and that it was going to be up to me to find solutions. And so I started searching because I had exhausted all of the solutions that I was aware of.
Right. It's amazing because I'm thinking about, myself and my son. And though he's my child by birth, that, we both had similar trauma experiences by the same person. And, I sought out somatic experiencing for myself because I was so tired of talk therapy and just tell yourself you're safe. But that's what I sought it out. But with my son, he was in traditional therapy and I couldn't change because of the way our divorce was. But he would put down, and it was during COVID, so he would put down the iPad with his therapist and walk out of the room. And then I would get a text or a phone call, get Joshua back in therapy. And it's not working. He doesn't want to. So he ended up doing some sessions with a somatic therapist, and it was so helpful. And the same thing, I think it's searching for answers.
Searching for answers and realizing, seeing firsthand that so many therapies intend well, but are actually can be harmful. We've approached therapy and emotional health and trauma recovery in the wrong way. Like we've been using wrong tools, and in the process causing damage and really preventing and blocking people from having the recovery and the healing journey that they could have.
So you have this biology of trauma program that's yours. Can you tell us more about that?
Sure. So what happened with my story was that I am now a resident, and Miguel has had a wonderful healing experience and transformation, and it's been wonderful to see the end of that, see what was possible for him that I never imagined possible. Always wanted, but didn't actually know if it was possible. And then what happened was that I got very sick. And I got so sick that I couldn't get out of bed for a period of time. And I was needing again to find answers, but I thought, Aimie, that I was needing to find answers just for my physical health. And so I go to the doctor. I'm a doctor, but I go to the doctor, I get labs done. And what starts to come back is, thankfully, what made me very curious, because now from studying attachment very intensely, right? Like I knew attachment up and down from all that I had to learn to help Miguel. And so in the process of learning all that, I had come across the adverse childhood experiences studies and been able to see very clearly that stress and trauma in childhood had such a profound impact that it showed up in adulthood as diseases. And at the time when I was studying this, being a physician myself, I was like, oh, isn't that interesting, right? But I didn't know what to do about it, right? I mean, they didn't tell us that.
It's just a grade we give patients, right?
That in the article, they just made the connection. And it was fascinating, Aimie, for me to be laying in my bed and for me to go through the checklist that everything that I was experiencing had been on that list of connected to childhood stress and trauma. And to me, that was not my story. I would not look back on my child and be like, oh my goodness, the trauma. No, that wasn't me. That was my son. And if this checklist, if my son had been having these physical health problems, I would have understood it. And I almost, Aimie, probably would have not done anything about it, because it's just like, well, it's to be expected. We can't do anything about it. But because it wasn't what I identified as my childhood, then it made me curious about, wait a second, I think I'm missing something, because how is it possible that I'm having all of this stuff show up in adulthood just like they predict? It's almost textbook, but yet I don't have that high ACE score. And so it then opened me up to learning and studying, well, okay, then what is it that happens in childhood? If it's not technically trauma, then what is it that happens in childhood that then leads to these exact things in adulthood? And then, of course, for me, I'm asking, and what can I do about it? Because this is not going to be the rest of my life. I will not settle for this being the rest of my life. And so it opened up this whole new arena of study for me. And what I found was that, oh my goodness, you're right. Like, we have completely misunderstood trauma. We have labeled it as specific things, and it's actually not that at all. It's actually not that at all. And so it opened my eyes to the fact that my body had certain experiences that, yes, had the same effect, had the same result as someone else who would have had a trauma. And this is always going to be the downstream effect unless you intervene or intercept and can change what's playing out in your biology. And so for me, that's where I saw this area of trauma that I didn't know about, and that I saw as my way of getting my life back, which was, I can see how these life experiences affected my biology. And now, how can I support my biology? How can I bring in tools to address the biology so that I can get my health and my life back? And at the time, Aimie, like, I didn't know if it was possible. I had no template to follow to know that you could undo trauma and these patterns in your biology as an adult. I did not know if it was possible. And so it's been through the process of experimenting and trying different things. And that's where all these different trainings came into play, because everything that I saw helping and working, I'm like, I need to go figure out what they are doing. I need to understand it, and I need to understand what it's doing on a cellular level, because I am clear that if this is what becomes our biology is really where we need to focus to then get back to a place of health and reverse what has happened.
Right. So what's an example, whether it doesn't have to be personal, but of something that is trauma that you're saying it's not what we thought was trauma, but it's trauma?
Yeah. So when we look at trauma, it's really what happens in the nervous system. And so the nervous system has 3 different states. I didn't know this stuff. Like, they didn't teach this stuff to me in medical school. Like, I'm still just blown away at how much I had to unlearn and then relearn of the body after even going through medical school, anatomy, physiology, and general surgery residency, for goodness sakes. So the nervous system, which is what keeps us alive, what keeps our body going, has 3 different states. And there's a specific state in which anytime that you dip into that state, that is the trauma response. And what causes us to dip into that state in our body, this is not even, we're not even talking about our mind anymore. We're talking about our body. And anything that is too much, too fast causes us to go into that state, which is the trauma response, or anything that is something that we truly need, is a need of ours, but we've had too little of it for too long. And that will also cause our body to go into the trauma response. And when our body goes into the trauma response, it is its way of surviving something by just getting through, by existing. We don't necessarily feel alive. We don't necessarily feel connected. In fact, we lose all of that when our body goes into the trauma response. And we really are now just going through the motions. We're just getting by. We're just getting through. And that changes our biology, because then that now starts to create inflammation in different places. It starts to shut down the digestive system. So now we have all of these things happening in our digestive system, everything from poor absorption of nutrients, but then even more prone to infections like Candida or SIBO or, stomach ulcers or reflux. Like all of the systems start to experience imbalances that then start to affect the whole body. Now, we may not notice it immediately, and that's why these symptoms, conditions, diseases, if you want to call it that, start to show up in full force decades later, because it's been building for that long.
Right. And it can even start in the NICU, or in the womb. Yeah. Because that baby's not held. Yeah. It doesn't get the needs met.
Totally concerning. And it definitely does. Just that experience. And even the whole NICU environment, and even the reason why it's in the NICU, all of that would have been too much too fast for an infant who can't handle anything of life at that time. Like they literally are not developed enough. Their system is not mature enough to handle any stress. That's why that co-regulation is so important. And that skin to skin and that holding, like that is what keeps them in that place of feeling safe in the world, because they are too small, too fragile to handle any stress. And so you take them away from that, it doesn't matter what it is, but then let alone you put them in a NICU where they're also now being poked and there's bright lights and there's noises, and it is way too much. And every baby, every child who's had a NICU experience started to have this experience of overwhelm, and their body went into the trauma response starting in the NICU.
They ask those questions why many years later sometimes, right? So using the word stress a lot. So what's that difference between stress and trauma?
Yeah, so this is a great topic. And again, where I see that we've misunderstood trauma, and even we can go into our providers or therapists and counselors, and they can tell us, oh, you have chronic stress and you need to do stress management. And actually, no, it's not chronic stress.
Yeah, it's like, really?
No, right? Yeah, let me try to manage my stress better. Thank you for that. But actually, like what it is the trauma response, but they don't recognize it. And so they're not being able to use those words for us. But the stress response is one of the other 3 states of the nervous system. And so when the body is in the stress response, it is a high energy state. When you think of having any kind of a startle of something might be wrong, right? Or something, there might be a danger. Your initial response, unless you've been programmed so long to just immediately go into that shutdown state, your body is otherwise programmed to first go into this high energy state. And you are naturally going to be leaning into the problem and figuring out, like, what is it? Let me gather information. I need to know how big of a threat this is. What exactly is this? Where is this coming from? Like, our senses normally tune into all of that. It leans into the problem. And most importantly, it takes action. So there's a lot of movement that happens in the stress response. It's high energy. If you want to relate it to, the animal kingdom, this is when you would be running from the lion or whatever's chasing you. You are actively taking action with the energy that you have to either solve the problem or run away from the problem, but you're taking action. And once the body switches from stress mode to trauma response, that's when we're no longer taking action. That's when we're no longer leaning into a problem, but we're trying to not even look at the problem. We don't even want to see it. We want to avoid it. We want to distract ourselves. We don't want to look at it. We're not taking action to solve the problems in our life. So when we look at, am I in a high energy state? Meaning I'm taking action, not I'm in a high energy because I feel that I'm anxious and my thoughts are ruminating over something. That's not still necessarily the stress response. It's, are we actually taking healthy action? Or are we thinking about it, but not doing anything about it? Or are we turning on a movie because we don't want to think about it, or distracting ourselves in some other ways? That's the difference between stress and trauma. And when we look at that difference, that's where I had to learn that, I had actually spent a large portion of my life in the trauma response. And I had thought the whole time that it was stress.
Yeah, or a movie with the phone and a plate of food and something else. It's multiple things to help distract.
It can be anything, right? And that's the point. There's so many things for us to use to distract.
And then, picking or something else is like, and then the list just adds up, is not working. So we have to add on something else.
All of it. Yeah. And even, calling friends and talking about it, right? That's one way to just stay, kind of stay away from actually taking action. It's like, let me just talk about it. Let me just tell one more person.
So how can we recognize that unresolved stored trauma in order, to work through it? How can we first recognize it?
Yeah, so there's different ways that we can recognize it. We can recognize it through our physical health. And if we're having health problems that are these downstream effects of the trauma response, that is one way to recognize that, like I've got this trauma response playing out in my body because I see it in my physical health. I see that I have sleep problems. I see that I have energy problems. I have fatigue, or I have chronic pain, or I have fibromyalgia, or I'm overweight, or I have an autoimmune condition, or I have digestive problems. These are all ways in which we can see, I can see that my body is coming from this place of survival based on my physical health and these conditions that are associated with that trauma response. But then we can also look at our thoughts. And so this is where, once we understand the trauma response, we can actually see that the state in which our body is in is going to decide what kinds of thoughts we're going to have. So when we are in the stress response, our thoughts are going to be, like, let me try this. Let me learn this. Let me find this out. Let me reach out to this person. Whereas when we're in the trauma response, there are going to be thoughts of, I can't do this anymore. I don't want to do this anymore. I want to give up. I want to give in. I want to quit it all. I want to run away. Can I just walk away from all of this? Any of those kinds of thoughts are actually ways in which we can be like, I think my body's in the trauma response, because that's a thought that goes with the trauma response. And then we can actually look at our body sensations. So does my body feel heavy? Does my body feel like there's this energy collapse? If I just let my body naturally fall into the position, into the posture that it would want to, would I kind of curl up in a ball? Do I feel like I want to curl up in a ball and maybe even pull the covers over my head? The body sensations are a very distinct way to help us understand, I think my body's in the trauma response, because these are the sensations that come with that. The heartache, or the stomach ache, or that feeling of a knife in your gut, where it feels like I have no energy. I have no energy for life. I don't want to do anything. And I feel just this kind of heaviness that feels like it's just coming from my soul.
Yeah, I'll have patients in my office, like, they'll look away and then grab a blanket and cover up with it. Like, can we put the blanket down and look at me? But when in this is a sign, I know
Yes.
they're about to get in that response or they're in the response.
Exactly. Which is helpful that we have these different ways, because some people may not connect as well with their body, right? And that's part of the trauma response. They're not connected with their body. They don't realize the heaviness, and they actually use coping mechanisms to not feel the heaviness. And so they're drinking caffeine, or they're using food as a way to bring energy and to wake themselves up so that they don't feel this heaviness. And if you take that away, or maybe they multitask a lot, and maybe they run around and keep themselves busy. At the moment that they actually stop and sit, ooh, like that's when all the emotions surface, and they're like, oh yeah, no, I don't want to feel that. Let's get busy again. And so it's helpful to have these 3 different ways that we can actually recognize the trauma response, so that we're not just having to rely on one way, because we can miss it if we're not used to paying attention to that, or using coping mechanisms to not even feel that.
Right. You mentioned fibromyalgia. How often do you see it like diagnosed when it's really trauma?
Well, I would say that because of the biology of fibromyalgia, everyone with fibromyalgia has a strong trauma response in their body. How often are they getting told this? I think very little.
And then losing that hope that I can get better or that this can be resolved.
Right. Yeah, there's so much hope once you realize that what's driving those symptoms and keeping a person in those symptoms is the nervous system. And we can change that. Like, we can actually change those nervous system patterns and how much time our body spends in this trauma response, and help shift it out.
So you mentioned a lot of the effects on the body. So how does that resolve, or what are the ways that you help people resolve that stored trauma and the effects on the body? And that's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question, and I smile because this is what brings me the most meaning. And it still is something that surprises me, in a sense, that from out of my experience, that I've been able to help so many people, because I never imagined, this was never the intention and purpose for me, right? At the time when I was going through this, it was just to help my son first. And then when it became me, it was like, all right, I've got to figure this out for myself. And I never imagined that I would be teaching this and guiding people through their journey. So what I do now is I, guide groups through these different journeys. We start with what I call the 21-day journey, because that walks people through the essential sequence to addressing stored trauma in the body. And when you understand how the body goes into the trauma response, it gives us the map to come back out. And when a body goes into the trauma response needs 3 things, one thing primarily, and we have to start with that one thing. So the trauma response needs 3 things. It needs time, it needs energy, and then it needs safety. And so one of the first things that's the easiest for us to do and provide for our body is the safety piece. And when I talk with people, they tell me that they don't feel safe in their body, but have not even known that they don't feel safe in their body. And it's not until I start to teach them, what I use is some basic somatic exercises to create that felt sense of safety. And then that's when they're like, oh, this is what it feels like to be safe in my body. Yeah, I've never felt this. But yet again, if you had asked them, or, if they have said affirmations or mantras about, like, oh, I feel safe, we can think that, well, I think I feel safe, but it's not until we actually create that felt sense of safety for ourselves, not looking to someone else to create that for us, but we create that for ourselves. And we feel that we're like, oh yeah, I've never felt this before. This is a new experience for me. And that's exactly what it is, right? So trauma is an experience of the body. And we have to create different experiences for ourselves to rewire what trauma has wired into our system.
Right. I was meeting with a couple, and I was trying to explain anxiety to the husband. I was like, you know how you can just like drift off into no man's land? He's like, uh-huh. I was like, she can't do that. And he was like, you can't. And she was like, you can do that. And I think the same one thing is like, if you can't regulate or relax, you don't know it until you do.
You don't know it. It's not anything that you've ever known. And for me, that's where so much of the change starts to happen for people is when they can bring in that felt sense of safety for themselves. I've started a study. And so everyone who goes through my 21-day journey now, and there's been over 2,000 people, I study them, right? And so I ask them these questions before they ever start, and then at the end, and then a few months later. And I ask them questions about their physical health, along with their anxiety level, depression level, but then also this felt sense of safety. And of all the people that go through the 21-day journey, that is what changes the most. They experience a 60% increase in their felt sense of safety. And for them, for having never felt truly safe in their bodies, to now experience a 60% increase in their felt sense of safety, it is a huge change. But what happens is then that creates changes in their health. And they start to experience better sleep. And they start to experience better digestive system. And they experience better energy. And they start to experience all of these things that are a result of their body actually getting out of that trauma response and feeling safe for the first time. But as we, and part of this is what I teach in my courses in the 21-day journey, is that when we come out of the trauma response, where our body goes is into the stress response. I would love for it to just land in, the all is well parasympathetic state, but that's not how it got into the trauma response. And so that's not the way out. And so as we come out, as our body comes out of this state that has been kind of frozen and walled off from life, and we bring life back into these places, then it's like it wakes back up, and it wakes back up into the stress that it got overwhelmed by. And what does the stress response need? Oh, well, the stress response needs a felt sense of support, because when we go through something stressful, if we know that someone has our back, we can do so much more than if we feel that no one has our back. And so that's the next piece to this. And that's what we do in the second week of the 21-day journey, is helping them. I teach them exercises, 7 different exercises, to create a felt sense of support for themselves, not someone else. We're not going to put this on anyone else right now. This is us creating these experiences for ourselves. And when they create that felt sense of support for themselves for the first time, it's like their body's finally able to relax, because their body has been holding on for so long. Their body has been bracing for so long because I can't let go. I can't relax. No one has my back. And now I can relax. And oh my goodness, like the changes that people experience. Then the last week of that 21-day journey, we move into what's called expansion. And this is where a lot of people have gone wrong with different therapies, is that they try to process trauma, or they try to go into joy, or they try to go into mindset without laying the foundation of a felt sense of safety and a felt sense of support first. Those are your foundations. It is actually not safe for us to try to tap into more joy in our life or growth in our life without us feeling safe and supported. Our body will go back into the trauma response. It will shut us down in order to try to protect us. So we have to lay those foundations. And that's why we do that in the first week, and then the second week of the 21-day journey. And then we move into expansion, which includes everything from even healthy boundaries and anger, and how do we express anger in a healthy way. That can only be in place when we have this foundation. And so that is the essential sequence that I walk people through. Now, this is a very compressed 21-day journey. And so when they are done with laying this foundation, then I open them up to the advanced journeys that I lead. Right now, I'm leading one that's just on this trauma response, and a journey into and through their trauma response. We actually just had a class today And we're in the second week right now. And already the shifts and the insights, the changes that are happening in their health. Kimberly is one that shared today. And she says that as she's been working on this trauma response and she's noticed changes in her body, spending less time in it, the craziest thing happened where it has been watching her blood sugar levels. She watches that constantly. And in the mornings, her blood sugar has always been high, around 115. It's supposed to be below 100, but she's never been able to change that. And so she's just continued to watch it. Well, now that she's working on her trauma response, her morning blood sugar levels are normal. She's waking up with normal blood sugar levels below 100, and she is actually feeling like she got restful sleep. And she's never felt that before. She's like, oh, is this how sleep is supposed to feel? Like, I actually feel like I rested while I was asleep. And these are the changes that will happen to our health when we work on this trauma response, because it is what drives our biology. It is what drives our physiology. And so when we can go to the true root cause and work on this trauma response by bringing in that felt sense of safety and then support, and then working on the expansion, which includes the more advanced therapy work and processing some traumas, my goodness, like, what is not possible? It's amazing.
We know that with like the stress trauma response, we secrete all the stress hormones that impact cholesterol, heart disease, diabetes. So health improves with all of this. So it's a wonderful program. I know some professionals do listen. So do you mind sharing a little bit about the professional side of your program?
Yes, I do train professionals now. And so many professionals around the world have come and be like, all right, we want to learn how to do this. And we want this lens of understanding the biology of trauma. They feel that the tools that they've had have been good, but just missing a piece. And so by understanding how the trauma response affects our biology and the tools that we can bring in has been really valuable for them. So I have opened up my professional training program, and it's 1 year for the professional level, the second year for the advanced professional level, where I'm teaching them everything that I know and do in regards to actually working with someone's system and helping them come out of this chronic trauma response that's been running their life. And to be able to give them those tools, like, that's really where we're going to make the most impact in the world, where then they go and they work with all of their people and start to help them come out of this trauma response. And it's been so fun to see them light up with coming back with stories of, I did it. Like, I worked with this client and I did exactly what I've seen, and this is what happened. And like, they say the words like, it works. And I'm like, well, of course it works, right? Like, I know that it works because this is not something that I studied. This is something that I learned from personal experience, from going through this and from trying so many different things and having to come and distill it down to, all right, what are those things that actually work? What are those things that we can apply even as adults that will still change and rewire trauma in our body?
Yeah, I think that's key is, you did this because it worked with your son, yourself. You've seen it in your program participants. I've seen it work, and shows there is hope for people that have experienced a trauma, that it does get better. And so, I want people to know that are listening that it does get better. You can experience the same thing that your participants experienced, that you've experienced, your son's experienced. Any last thoughts or words for listeners?
No, I think that's beautiful what you just said. I mean, that would be my last thoughts, is that I had no idea that this was possible. And until I got sick, I did not even realize that I had just been living my life existing, that there was this whole new level of aliveness and living life that I had no access to because I had never experienced it. And so just being able to be open to the possibility that life could be so much more than what we have been living.
Great. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. And to listeners, if you liked it, please subscribe and tune in to the next episode. Thank you again for tuning in to our podcast, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. We hope you were able to leave with some renewed hope. And if you like what you heard, please subscribe to the channel, give us a review, head to the show notes for more information on the things that we highlighted. And there's also a link to the website for a course that we offer on the same topic, Hope After Narcissistic Abuse. Thank you again, and please tune in to the next episode.